Today, let's talk about how to engage with new CRO clients. Welcome to the Treachery of Data podcast, the companion podcast for the CRO Roundtable, a bite sized chunk of content summarizing something that we discussed at a recent roundtable. Okay, so say you're, working solo as a consultant or at an agency, and you've got leads coming in. Well, how do you, take those leads and figure out which are going to be good clients to work with? Because okay, maybe in the early days you have to take whatever's coming to you because you're young and scrappy and you're a startup and what have you. But at some point, you're probably going to have more leads coming in. And you won't know what to deal with, or you want to mitigate churn and say like create you like CRO is a long term process, right? Like it's a continuous improvement cycle. So you want to work with people long term. You don't want to have to be onboarding and churning clients every 3 months or something like that. Because that's not, you're not gonna have a lot of good work product to show out of that. So first off, so say, right, you've got a lead coming in. Okay, what do you do with that
Mm.
lead? What are a couple of the things that you need to look at there?
It all really depends on your own ethics and your own alignment in terms of what's important for you.
Is the client ethically aligned with m either my company's values, right?
Yes,
Like, so
yes,
and hypothetically, some examples of that would be like, would you be okay working with a gun manufacturer or, a company that's in the military industrial complex or an adult content producer or I don't know, like what would be some other examples of like maybe quote unquote ethically dubious client bases?
well, it'd be like the adult film industry or something like that, or the sex industry or anything that related. I remember some guys who stipulate that they will only work with companies that have a certain sort of green credential level. So basically, they would really research that company and see whether or not they meet their requirements in terms of like are they really investing in the green sort of side.
It's completely up to you, like
Yeah, yeah,
what your boundaries and uh, pathways are there of like, yes, I'm okay working with this company. No, I'm not okay working with that. Yeah. So after ethics, then next
mm,
up is just like client uh, statistical limitations. Would
yeah,
basically like, it does the company have enough tra- traffic to run testing?
yeah. And
Um, and
that could be a difficult question to answer straight away, or it could be an easy one. Like if an easy one would be like Craig mentioned, they've got 15 conversions per month, or they're literally just starting up. And in which case, and depending on the services you want to offer, like instance, um, if you are purely experimentation driven, you want to build A/B experiments, and that's what you want to do. Versus, you also want to do some user research, user test, so because that experimentation mindset is quite a wide is kind of like a wide gamut of stuff. A/B testing is one of them. So yeah, depending on what it is you want to do, like if you want to focus on actually building A/B tests, then the technical limitations of the traffic and stuff like that is probably going to be something that you should really keep in mind.
that's a really good point, is like, depending on the services that you're offering, you need to
Yeah,
evaluate those kinds of things. Yeah. If you're doing experiments, they need to have enough traffic to be able to run experiments. Otherwise, your service
yeah,
just isn't viable. However, if you're offering research services, then maybe it is because that's not as wholly dependent on, traffic volume and statistical needs.
Yeah, and maybe like your goal is like, or what you're looking for is, hey, I want to run like multiple experiments and really maximize learnings, get loads of tests out there, and and go from there. And maybe for whatever reason, the technical limitations won't allow you to do that, and then maybe that is not a good fit for you.
Yeah, and dovetailing off of our previous episode, like, the service needs to be profitable. If you're only profitable at a rate where it's like, "Oh, we need to be producing 3 to 4 experiments per month for it to be profitable to us," then that plays a factor in there. Like, well, is that, website, does it have enough traffic capable of running that many tests at that level of frequency?
Yeah, that's a really good point actually, because I didn't think about that because there's an entire sort of thing with your internal agency, your company, and when is it profit is it like, does it make financial sense to take on this client with the level of work that you would have to do for them. Maybe it's too little work. We make like,
Yeah. Yep.
half a day a week, 1 day a month or whatever, in which case it might not be viable. I know I've kind of like, so let's talk about like people you've said no to, and because it happens basically, you kind of go, this isn't like a bit. And one of the reasons why I've said no in the past is because the hours weren't there. I don't see the hours there to be to make it worth my while, or in terms of from that technical limitations aspect and the
Yeah.
financial fit.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to think about it, of like what would be things that you would say no to? And one of the
Yeah,
things that,
yeah,
mm, I learned this over time, and I still ended up doing it occasionally, but, like, if the client wanted an hourly pricing model or something, like they wanted to pay by the hour, I was like,
yeah,
"No, that's not the way I price my services, and that's not the way I have it set up, and I don't wanna track my time, and there's too much variability there." Like, it's value-based pricing that reasonably approximates the level of work output, you know? The pricing models is a whole other side topic to get into too. We got into it a little bit last week, but it's also tied into this there. Like, there needs to be client, agency match there.
yeah,
Now that
yeah. Sometimes
no, go sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
sometimes it could be a personality match.
Oh,
Like
yeah,
I
we were
know,
trying
I
to
know.
segue at the
There's been
same
a
time here into this.
yeah, yeah. So personality match wise, you might find like, oh yeah, I didn't really care for the way that the communication was going on. I can foresee us not getting along as client and consultant, and so yeah, and that's really important because the last thing you want to do, and I've been there, is take on a client and then you realize that you know, hey, that's this, in terms of personality match, in terms of like that company and the way the company is organized and the way that the people you're going to be working for and the work that you're going to be doing and the way that they see their work and the way they see experimentation and the way they view things is completely different to you. And that kind of yeah, it might be that you fancy a challenge and you want to go into that, but it might be that, hey, you just want
Or
to
you
get
wanna just
along
or you wanna
with.
gain experience in working in that way or or communicating in that style,
Yeah,
yeah. Like, there's communication expectations there of, like, here's how you communicate, both in terms of, like, language and type of communication as well, meaning, like,
yeah,
does the client want to do weekly calls? Do they want to be involved in the process? Do they only wanna communicate over email? Um, do Are you in alignment of like both wanting to use Slack or Discord or some other chat
Mm,
software or
mm.
something like that? What's their expectations on like, hey, I you need to give me a daily status update. It's just like, well, no, that's just busy work. Like, I'm not going to give you like daily monitoring updates and things like
Yeah.
that. Like, there needs to be alignment there.
Yeah, yeah. The other one you mentioned is like the desire to be an hourly pricing model and want them to have a breakdown of all the tasks an hourly way, and it might not be how you work. So so there's lots of different aspects of it where you can just kind of go, well, this is how I like to work, and then you just present it to them, and then if and then you kind of like figure out whether or not you guys want to work together. Um, so the other thing is like how a business, yeah, I mean, getting to like say all of that is fine.
So you've done like you've done you've gone through a vetting process of like, okay, we're good to work with each other
Yeah,
now, and have are you talking about like now, like, okay, contracts and everything have been signed and things like that, or are we still before even that stage?
this is after that stage because
Okay.
what I've done in the past is basically like the first thing that I do, and this might be completely different with how everybody else does it. So this is purely how I do things. Um, I always start with like a one-off project, which is the auditing or the insights document. Um, so I'd say the first thing I'm going to do is give you an insights document where I'm going to look at your business, look at your website through all sorts of different lens and angles and stuff like that. For instance, look at how does your business make money? Speak to like what is your current experimentation program? How's the analytics set up? UX audit, UI audit, checking customer reviews, looking at all sorts of different dimensions
So
and building
this
up
is
a
like a second layer of vetting to essentially figure out like, hey, are you at a place where you're good to like run an experimentation program, or is there a whole bunch of other stuff that we need to do first? Like
yeah,
you're talking about like
exactly.
analytics setup, right? Like there's garbage in, garbage out. Like
Yeah.
if your GA setup is crap, you can't and you're looking at it and you're like, well, I can't rely on this for, getting data out of it. Like I don't trust this setup. Okay, that needs to be fixed before you can run experiments, right? So all the technical bits and bobs you have to set up, audit, and make sure that they're outputting trustworthy data first.
Exactly. So basically, there's the initial one, which is the very, very sort of like as a much more of a personal thing, vetting, and then there's then like okay,
Right.
uh, what is the actual work that we are going to be doing? Because and kind of getting really knee deep in that. And the reason why that would be a project is because it's quite a big sort of project, quite a big task to do. You're looking at, you're
This isn't
going
something
through
you can
auditing
do in like
analytics.
2 hours. This is like
No,
2 weeks minimum, if not probably even longer than that.
yeah, yeah. And then at the end of that, what you would have is you would have a very good idea what the strategy might be for that company, what the experimentation strategy might be, if any. Like it might be that you kind of go, well, like you were mentioning the analytics angle. Well, before we even start, we're going to need to look at the analytics. We're going to need to fix these
I can't
tracking
figure
stuff. We
out
need
what's
to gather
wrong
some more insights.
if I don't have reliable data, first off.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So there might be so from that aspect, you'll understand much more about what is the actual day-to-day work, what is the strategy, what is it that you are actually going to do for this company. And then at that point, I mean, you build them for that insights document, and then you kind of like, well, this is what I do. We kind of figure out, okay, so this is what you need. This is what my recommendations are. Um, what do you is that does that match with what you guys want to do? And if then things are looking good and there's a good fit going forward, then after that, do we start to actually engage in the strategies that have been recommended, and actually
Yeah.
get started with the work itself?
Yeah. And I know I've harped on data a lot, but obviously there's other things you can do as well that aren't reliant on analytics tools accumulating data on the website. Like that's obviously important, but you can also do things like more like qualitative research of like doing customer review, um, customer surveys, reading through
Yeah,
on-site and off-site reviews, doing usability testing, right? There's lots of research avenues to engage in to identify like, okay, what are the problems and areas of opportunity? And essentially you're using all of that research to build out an insights list of, hey, here's the things that we think will improve whatever the client's OKRs or KPIs
yeah,
are, you know, and then that insight document, that's what's priming the pump for running an experimentation program and or figuring out like if an experimentation program is possible in a more defined fashion than like your baseline like statistical limitations that were, part of the early vetting process.
yeah. And if they've got a current experimentation program, then that's going to be taken into account in terms of like what is the strategy going to be going forward? Is it that we're going to go for velocity? Is it that we're going to be going to slow down velocity and focus on certain areas of user research or all of that kind of stuff? So yeah, all of this, the result of all of that audit is you figuring out exactly what strategy you want to employ and whether or not the company agrees with that strategy or is on board. And then, there has to be alignment at that stage as well.
I have a big question here
Yeah.
in regards to doing the big auditing process here. Um, because a lot of places are like, well, they've signed up for a retainer.
Mhm.
We need to get experimentation up and running as quickly as possible. There's lots of schools of thought here of like, you have to do this research first before you do experimentation versus like experimentation's all about velocity. So you got to get stuff up and running as quickly as possible. And if you're like doing a 3-month research project before you even do your first test, you're too slow. Like, are these two diametrically opposed things, or is there room in the middle to do like to dual track this where you can do the research but also stand up experiments at the same time?
Oh, there's definitely room in the middle. And I'd be lying if I said that this is that whole insights document and then the work is always the way that I do it. Like you could go into a you could start off work and they could have already have done a whole bunch of sort of insight mining themselves. They might have done got a third party company to do some user research and conduct a whole raft of user testing and stuff like that. There could be, some really, really good sort of dashboards with data analytics to see, exactly what's happening with the data where all the opportunities could be. So there's again, it's kind of like when you first start, you have to look at what their baseline is, and you kind of go, okay, so in order for me to get value or to give value to this company, this is what I need to fill in the gaps, or this is what I need to do in order to be comfortable with actually engaging in a specific strategy for experimentation with them.
That's the good point. That's the keystone there is like you can set up and run an experimentation program without having done any prior research, right? You're just, coming up with ideas from wherever and shotgunning experiments.
Yeah.
And the the I'll say issue with that is you don't know what's gonna be successful necessarily. I mean, you can have insights based on like, "Oh, well, we ran this experiment on 5 other sites and it was good," or, you can have some prior experience in, like, helping figure out stuff. But, like, using that research, that's what actually helps you prioritize and find the things to focus on. And, like, that's the thing that solves the problem of, like, when it, uh 'cause I'm sure you've done the same where you've talked to other people in the past and they're like, "Yeah, we did experimentation, but we didn't get any value out of it." Like, we ran experiments for like 3 months, 6 months, whatever, and none of the tests were winners. So we like, "Well, this is useless," kind of thing. Yeah, that's because probably you were just shotgunning experiments of like whatever ideas came to mind, or like you like looked at some other site and was like, "This looks cool," or like read some article of like, "Hey,
Mm.
you should try this," or something like that, right? Versus
Yeah.
not actually sorting your ideas based on the problems that you actually have.
Yeah.
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 So you
Like
don't
for instance,
have to do both, but like doing the research helps the experimentation program actually like have a better chance at being successful.
yeah, which is why like that research is such a fundamentally important um, part of the process for me. What about you guys? Like, so you guys are just starting, you guys just
Mhm.
started out selling CRO services from the agency that you're in.
Yeah, we
What
just
kind of
barely started and we're only at this level we're only selling to internal clients to start with. So already
yeah,
existing clients who are using other agency services who may not be have CRO uh, in place yet. Um, and this is exactly the kind of stuff that we're figuring out as well. Like we can shortcut some of this a little bit in like that early auditing process because they're internal clients. So like they've been vetted, you know, already anyway. And so, like, we're more at the stage of like, hey, we have to do like the research and testing and things like that, and how we're actually selling those services. That could be a whole other topic on its own. Doing things like, oh, are we like offering sample services, how to prepare a proposal, like all the muckiness of like getting contracts together, like and what should be in your contracts. How price modeling,
price
all of these
modeling,
different things. Yeah,
ex- yeah.
there's whole other a bunch of other topics that we could dive into there.
So let's really quickly just bridge on price modeling.
Okay.
I'm going to just
You have a
quickly
you have
tap
a
into
piece
that.
to say about pricing, or this could be like teaser for next time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll first of all preface this by saying that I'm not very good with pricing. Like, hands up on that
Yeah.
front. I probably
Everybody's
work
still
better.
figuring it out.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just still kind of figuring out. One thing that I do have figured out though is that for me, uh, I cannot see how you can get performance based pricing to work because that just leads to so many problems. And performance
Yes.
based means like, say, hey, we're going to have a base cost. And then depending on how much money we make you, you're going to give us an X percentage of that revenue because just that the way that they calculate how much revenue have you really produced for me is not really very clear cut. And it's something that has to be really, really well defined. And it's something that could easily backfire,
It's
lead
not
to
calculatable.
yeah, I mean,
Like
on the bottom
and
line,
we've
it's not
talked about
really
that
calculated.
before, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
when you're looking at the nice clean graph in your split testing tool, it shows the up and downs. Well, that's just the median, right?
Yeah.
There's a delta there of like, well, the revenue lift could be as good as this, or it actually could be not as good as this, right? Um,
Yeah.
and if you're like saying, oh, well, like, well, how do you estimate that off the amount of money? Like, is it like only for the period that the test ran? Do you estimate that out for like 3 months, 6 months? Like, are you, extrapolating out the results? Like, if you're extrapolating it out, it gets increasingly fuzzy over time. So say for example, you ran a test and you're like, this looks like it'll help make $1 million a year. Well, you guys owe us $100,000 now because we get 10%. Like that's nope, that's not gonna fly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Because who's
I'd
doing the
love to see that
estimation? Are you
conversation
doing
play
it
out.
or is the client doing it? And
Yeah.
if it's one or the other, there's incentive there. Like if you're the one doing it, you're incentivized to estimate as good as possible because your money coming in, right?
Yeah.
And of course, everybody listening to the podcast is totally ethically above board person and would be like super super conservative estimates and be honest and truthful and not like try and cheat the system there at all ever. No, but
Yeah. Not even accidentally.
no,
They wouldn't
no,
want to do that.
no.
The other thing is like, for instance, if say a website is, there's lots of people working on the website. So there's marketing teams who are bringing in traffic, for instance, and it could be your job to optimize that traffic. So then if in a 3 month sort of period or a 6 month period, even if you see that uplift, so who is really responsible
Right,
for that
attribution.
uplift? Is it, like in a team environment where we like to think of everybody working on the website is actually part of a big team? How do you now split the wins amongst everyone? Is
Yeah.
just Yeah, it's just something that's so complicated. Just don't want to get
Yeah.
into that.
Or even more simply, like if you're saying like, oh well, we're not going to do performance incentive based on like percentage of revenue. Well, what if you do it off of like we get a bonus for every winning test result that we find? That's still not a good way to do it because now you're
Yeah,
incentivizing you're incentivizing finding a specific result and it creates untruthfulness because like, oh, if I get a $10,000 bonus for every winner that I find, I'm naturally gonna try and find more winners. Not that, like, finding quote unquote "winners" is a bad thing, but if your paycheck is dependent on it, you're incentivized to do that. And you could and do you know, that could cause you to get into doing things like p hacking or, over segmenting stuff or only testing really easy gimme things that show winners and stuff, or taking like a single test that you like would hypothetically know is a winner and breaking it up into chunks. Like instead of running a test on a single product page, it's like, oh, we ran 10 tests on each product page type in different categories just to make sure. And but all 10 of those tests are winners. And now you have 10 winners instead of one winner. And now we're getting into how to cheat at CRO.
yeah, yeah. Again, I mean, this might be a controversial area because I know there's a lot of people who like their performance based um sort of pricing. But yeah, I'd like to hear the opposing view on that. But yeah, I really don't see how it can work because there is an often like an ongoing debate about, exactly how much money has experimentation brought in. Like
Mm,
if they're trying to, there's always been an element of let's try and put a figure, a cost, one value that's really, really concrete on experimentation, and that is not an easy thing to do. It's not something that I would ever want to be involved in, again, it goes
Yeah.
back to the original thing of, the trying to find a good fit with the client. Like if they're looking for an absolute value of, this, I want to know exactly how much money you're going to bring in for me, and we'll make it performance based or whatever. That's for me, that's a client that I don't want to work with, because it doesn't really vibe with the way that I work. Um,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It cycles back to what we were talking about earlier of like client fit.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, if you have any questions or feedback for me and Iqbal, you can always talk to us face to face at the CRO Roundtable every Friday, and you can join us through conversionworld.co. You can find the weekly CRO Roundtable under the events section there. If you're shy or you don't like speaking, you can connect with us on LinkedIn as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.